Hello, friends, and welcome back to another set of Malicious Compliance stories. It's the kind of story that could only happen in a small village, dirt roads, nosy neighbors, and a kid who just couldn't take a hint. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. He wanted a war over a land dispute. I gave him a technical mystery that made him surrender gratefully. In the early 90s, we bought a new house on a lot that was recently severed and sold from the neighbor's property. It was a large corner lot divided into two parcels. The back parcel was originally intended as a second driveway to connect the side road to the neighbors, but was mistakenly sold to us. Our neighbor, a known grumpy old guy, insisted that this back parcel was his property and was never intended to be sold. He and his lawyer messed up. He would often stand there right in front of our bedroom windows to kind of mark his property. Trying to have a reasonable conversation with him was impossible. I repeatedly told him that I had the deed and that the property line wasn't going to change. His wife was rarely seen as she had limited mobility and spent most of her time watching TV connected to a C-band satellite dish. At the time, I was working in wireless and had access to test equipment. To find a way to keep the neighbor occupied and hopefully give us some peace, I decided to generate interference that would jam his satellite signal. I set it up on a timer so their signal would cut out 10 minutes before the hour and come back 10 minutes after, meaning they would consistently miss the beginnings and ends of their TV programs. This definitely kept him busy trying to figure out what was wrong. He even called out technicians, but of course the issue never occurred when they were there. I could often hear his frustrated outbursts, and I imagined his wife was adding to the pressure. After a few weeks of this, I walked over to him while he was fiddling with the dish and casually mentioned that I worked in wireless and had some knowledge of satellite communications, and maybe I could have a look. He was immediately interested, so I climbed up the ladder, pretended to adjust something, gave him some technical-sounding nonsense about what I'd found, and then told him it was fixed. I then stopped the interference coming from my house. A few days later, he came over to thank me profusely, saying I had fixed it when no one else could. From that day forward, he was the friendliest neighbor and never mentioned the contested piece of land again. Somewhat tangential, but back in the day when CB radios were popular, some folks had linears that were like 50 watt in their car, and these would mess up TV reception. I recall that once folks started getting 100-watt linears, then FCC started bringing in enough vans to triangulate and busted a few of the folks from what I remember. The FCC took TV interference complaints pretty seriously back then. And our next story. My family tried to take my room, so I took the house. I, 25-year-old female, live with my parents in a very expensive city. We share a 3-bedroom high-rise condo. My mom wanted to move here because she was tired of living in the country, and I agreed since this city has tons of software engineering jobs. I landed a good one. I make 6 figures, while my parents, both school teachers, earn just under what I make combined. I pay 75% of the bills and the mortgage, and one of the spare bedrooms serves as my home office. Life was fine until my older brother, James, and his wife, Mary, decided to move in. They'd stayed in our old state, but when Mary got pregnant, my parents invited them to come live with us. I didn't know they'd already agreed until the day they showed up, luggage and all, demanding my room, the master with a walk-in closet and bathroom. I told them they could have the office since it already had an air mattress for guests. My parents sided with them, insisting I give up my room. I reminded everyone that I pay the majority of the bills and that the condo is technically my house. My name's on the mortgage. I said if they wanted to take my room, I'd move out and they could pay everything themselves. That shut things down fast. My mom called me a jerk, but my dad told them to use the spare room and dropped it. I figured that was the end of it. The next day, I left for work and realized I'd forgotten my laptop. When I came home during lunch to grab it, I walked into Mary moving my stuff out of my room. Everyone else had left for work. She yelled that Mom told her to do it. I lost it. I told her if any of her stuff was still in my room when I got back from work, I'd throw her and my brother out. My phone exploded with messages from Mom and James calling me selfish. Dad finally created a group chat saying we'd have a family meeting when everyone got home. So that night I stopped at the store and bought a doorknob with a lock for my bedroom. When I got home, my parents, James, and Mary were waiting on the couch. James tried to get in my face. He's older, but I'm taller, so I just pushed him back by the forehead. It probably humiliated him. Dad tried to mediate, suggesting again that I give them my room for now. Mary had this smug look on her face like she'd already won. I told them calmly that since I pay most of the bills, they're living under my roof. If James and Mary want the bigger room, they can pay rent, or all four of them can move out. My dad tried to bargain, but I cut him off. I said, if anyone brings this up again, I'll evict everyone. Mary started crying. I went to my room and locked the door. The next day, no one spoke to me except Dad, who was trying to keep the peace. That evening, I came home from dinner to find everyone eating except me. Mom told me she wasn't cooking for me until I learned to be a good son and give up my room. Dad agreed. That was the last straw. I pay for every grocery in that kitchen. So I went to my room, printed eviction notices from my parents, and handed them out. James and Mary hadn't been there long enough to be considered tenants, so I told them they had 1 hour to pack and leave or I'd call the police. My parents got 30 days. My mom cried, begging me not to do this. I told her it wasn't about food or family, it was about respect. My parents paid for a hotel for James and Mary that night. Mom apologized, but I ignored her. Update. The next day, Mom kept texting apologies, but I ignored her until I got home. When I walked in, everyone was sitting on the couch. Dad said they were sorry for how they acted, that they thought I'd back down like usual because I'm the reasonable one. James said he thought giving up my room was a small thing to do for family in need. But here's the thing, they're not in need. James has no debt. Dad's a veteran, so our education was covered. James changed majors 5 times, which added 3 extra years of tuition, and my parents covered that debt. They also kept our old house because James wanted to raise a family there someday, so they're juggling 2 mortgages. James argued that since it's our parents' condo, they should have the final say. I corrected him. It's my condo. I'm the one with the mortgage. He said there's no way I could afford it on a $50K salary. I laughed and told him I make triple that, and that without my income, our parents couldn't afford to live here because they're still paying off his choices. James went pale and said Dad told him the student loans were paid and the old house was fully owned. I looked at my parents, realizing they'd lied to protect him. I told James the truth. They're drowning in debt because of him, and that they refused to sell the house because of what he wanted. He turned to them and asked why they lied. Mom broke down sobbing. She admitted she knew he'd always been jealous of me, that it started when I made varsity football as a freshman while he rode the bench as a senior. We graduated the same year, and he'd never stopped comparing himself to me. To keep peace, they'd babied him, hoping he wouldn't hate me. James left without saying a word. Mary apologized, saying she didn't realize the condo was mine. I asked why that mattered. She didn't answer and went to the guest room. Dad confessed that they felt like they'd failed James, that he didn't get the same opportunities. I reminded him James chose to skip school, smoke, and run with bad crowds. I said maybe it's time he faced the consequences. Then I handed Dad another eviction notice and told him he had 30 days. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend for the night. Update 2. A few days later, James texted asking to meet for drinks. I was hesitant, but agreed. When I saw him, he looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. The first thing he did was apologize. It sounded sincere. Then he dropped a bombshell. During his senior year, he came home early one day and saw our uncle's car in the driveway. He heard noises inside, and when he looked through the window, he saw our mom and our uncle together. He recorded it, but didn't tell Dad because he didn't want to destroy the family. Instead, he spiraled. Drugs, drinking, skipping school. He said when Mom eventually confronted him about his behavior, he showed her the video. She panicked, begged him to stay quiet, and promised it was over. She only started favoring him after that, giving him everything, excusing his failures to keep him from telling Dad. She'd rather everyone think he was jealous of me than risk her secret coming out. James said he'd carried that weight for years, convinced he was protecting us. He started crying, saying he finally realized Mom's manipulation had turned us against each other. He said he didn't resent me anymore and wanted to make things right. I told him he could stay in the condo if he and Mary helped with bills. He agreed and said he wouldn't blame me if I told Dad the truth. Update 3. I did tell Dad. He took it quietly, no yelling, no denial. He said he'd once heard our uncle drunkenly mention it years ago, but thought it was a cruel joke. Hearing it confirmed hurt him, But after 30 years of marriage, he said he'd rather let things stay as they are. I've made my peace with who your mother is, he said. I didn't argue. He's a good man. Too forgiving, maybe, but it's his choice. Mom apologized again, claiming it was a terrible mistake. She'd been acting like her old self lately. Cheerful, kind, social. The tension's gone for now. James and Mary are paying rent, and the house feels calm again. I don't know what'll happen long term. My dad's still sleeping in the same bed as the woman who betrayed him. My brother's trying to rebuild his life, and I'm caught somewhere between wanting peace and feeling like I'm living in a house made of secrets. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like the balance has shifted. I'm not the family scapegoat anymore, and maybe that's enough for now. I'm guessing the parents and brother thought they had autonomy over you because you're the youngest. Your actions have proven they don't. Your mother, though? Wow. It's good that you didn't hesitate to put her and your brother in their place. Otherwise, this could have dragged on to them railroading you. Perhaps they'll get a place together. The obvious solution, since both couples are now and will be homeless. Not your problem, since everyone's an adult. Adult enough to make these decisions and adult enough to reap the consequences. And our next story. Don't mess with a man's garden. This happened about 20 years ago, back when our village was still quiet and far less populated than it is today. Just dirt roads, wide open yards, and neighbors who knew each other well enough to ask for sugar, coffee, hot water, or start a feud over a fence line. There was this teenage boy from a few houses down, around 14 or 15, who loved riding his beat-up BMX like he was training for the X Games. The main dirt road passed right by our property, but for whatever reason, he preferred cutting through our yard, and not just anywhere, but straight through my father's plants. My dad had a small garden back then, nothing fancy, just some shrubs, flowering plants, and a few vegetables growing in neat rows. It was his pride, something he tended to every day. So you can imagine his frustration every time the kids zoomed through and left tire marks across the soil. Dad warned him more than once, stick to the road, don't ride over the plants. The boy would nod and mumble an apology, but the next afternoon, there he'd be again, carving tracks right where he wasn't supposed to. Now, my dad isn't the kind to yell or make a scene, but he is the kind to get a little creative. One day, he went out back to the old shed near the edge of our property. It was a broken-down thing, leaning to one side and filled with old tools and scrap wood. From inside, he pulled out a nasty-looking plank, weathered and full of rusty nails. It looked like it had fallen off the shed itself. He placed it just off the edge of the garden, right where the kid usually cut across, and lightly covered it with some dry leaves and dirt. It blended in perfectly. To anyone riding through fast, it had just looked like a patch of ground. The next day, like clockwork, we heard the familiar sound of bike tires crunching dirt, then pop, hiss, followed by a startled yell. The boy had hit the trap dead on. Front tire was blown out. He stood there, staring at his bike in disbelief. About an hour later, he came back with his mother. She was angry, demanding to know why there were nails on the ground. Dad met them, calm as ever. "Why would you do something like that?" she asked, pointing at the boy's damaged bike. Dad just said, "Where exactly was he riding?" The boy, quietly and with a bit of guilt, pointed toward the garden. "And where did I tell him not to ride?" my father asked. There was a long silence. Then the mom turned to her son and gave him a scolding so fierce I think the birds flew out of the trees. No more questions, no more blaming. Just a red-faced teenager and his mom hauling the busted bike home down the very dirt road he should have stayed on in the first place. My dad? He went back to watering his plants like nothing happened. The garden stayed undisturbed after that. Your dad didn't want to fight, he wanted respect. That rusty plank was his way of saying, "You'll understand when you're older." And sure enough, that kid probably remembers that lesson every time he sees a "keep off the grass" sign. I have to say that the boy's mother was good to recognize the wrong that her child did. I hope that he was summarily punished when he got home. On second thought, his mother should have sent him back to help repair the damage that he did to the garden by riding through it. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.